I am 77 years old. Exactly 18 months ago, I weighed 98 kilos and couldn't climb the 14 steps to my bedroom without stopping 3 times just to breathe. Today, I am 30 kilos lighter. I am the one reaching the ridge of the hiking trail while my 45-year-old daughter asks me to slow down. We are taught that after 70, the body is a debt we simply have to pay. We are told that stiffness is a law of nature and that fading away is the only dignified path left. I believed that. I lived as a ghost in my own skin for a decade because I thought my story was in its epilogue. But I found a different truth. My body wasn't broken. It was just dormant. Strength is not a luxury reserved for the young. It is a quiet, steady choice we make with every meal and every walk. I am sharing this because I know what it feels like to be invisible. If you are also refusing to be written off, I invite you to stay with me. Subscribe to join this community of people who chose not to disappear, and tell me you are here in the comments. Your presence is what gives this story its weight. That sound? You know the one? That metallic, angry rasp of a zipper that's being asked to do far too much. It's a small sound, really. But in a quiet bedroom, when you're 77 years old and trying to get ready for a library fundraiser, it sounds like a gunshot. I remember standing there staring into the mahogany-framed mirror I've had since I was 30. The dress was a navy polyester, size 22. I'd owned it for a decade. It used to drape. It used to have a bit of a swing to it when I walked through the stacks at the library. But that night, it was a casing. I looked at my arms. They were pale and heavy, like unbaked dough. My shoulders were slumped, not from a burden I was carrying in my hands, but from the weight of my own skin. I've spent 40 years as a librarian. I know how stories are supposed to go. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And standing there, unable to pull that zipper past the small of my back, I realized I'd reached the epilogue. I wasn't Olivia anymore. I was just a piece of furniture, an old, overstuffed armchair that people have to navigate around at parties. You see the look in their eyes, that polite, distant kindness. They aren't looking at you. They're looking at the elderly woman, the one who needs the sturdy chair, the one who won't be staying late. I stopped fighting the zipper. I just let it fall. It's a slow disappearance, you know? It doesn't happen all at once. It's a series of small, quiet surrenders. You stop taking the long way to the mailbox. You start buying shoes because they're easy to slip on, not because they're pretty. You accept the tax of the stairs as a law of nature. My bedroom is on the second floor, 14 steps, just 14. But when you're carrying 98 kilos on a frame that was meant for much less, those steps are a mountain range. Every night, it was the same expedition. I'd stand at the bottom, hand trembling slightly on the banister, and I'd breathe, just preparing. It took me exactly 4 minutes to get to the top. I timed it once, 3 rest stops. One on the third step to let the hot, sharp pulse in my left knee settle. One on the 8th step to catch the breath that seemed to be whistling in my chest like wind through a cracked window. And one at the very top just to remember why I'd gone up there in the first place. I'd tell myself, Olivia, this is just what 77 feels like. This is the debt of age, and the collector has come to call. It's easier to believe that than to realize you're drowning in a body you don't recognize anymore. It's a comfort, in a strange way, a resignation. I'd get into bed, my joints throbbing with a dull, heavy ache, and I'd wait for 9 o'clock. That was the hour of the sweet anesthesia. I'd sit in my armchair with a box of store-bought butter cookies, the cheap kind, the ones that are far too sweet and leave a cloying, dry film on your tongue. I didn't even like them that much. But the crunch, that rhythmic, brittle sound, it drowned out the loneliness. It drowned out the feeling of my own heart thudding too hard against a chest that felt too tight. I was going through 3 family-sized packages a week. I'd sit there, the crumbs falling into the folds of my sweater like grit, and I'd feel nothing, just a sugar-coated numbness. I was eating to stay still. I was eating to accept that I was finished. I had become a ghost in a heavy coat. I'd stopped looking at photos. I'd stopped looking in shop windows. If I didn't see it, maybe it wasn't happening. Maybe I was still that woman who could walk for miles through the autumn leaves without a second thought. But the scale doesn't lie, even if you only step on it once a year at the doctor's office. 98 kilos. A number that felt like a sentence. I had surrendered. I really had. I'd made my peace with the fact that my world was shrinking, from the library to the garden to the kitchen to that one armchair. I was just waiting for the last bit of me to fade out. Until that Tuesday night. The house was so quiet you could hear the refrigerator hum from 3 rooms away. I was reaching for another cookie. My fingers were already dusty with sugar when I caught a glimpse of the darkened window across the room. The lights were low, and for a second the glass acted like a mirror. I saw a woman sitting there, slumped, gray, a stranger. But then the wind caught a branch outside, and a sliver of moonlight hit the glass, just for a heartbeat. And in that reflection, I saw something. Not a miracle, not a transformation, just a flicker, a tiny hairline crack in the wall I'd built around myself. My hand stopped halfway to the box. I looked at my reflection, and for the first time in 10 years, I didn't look away. I just sat there, and I wondered. I stayed there for a long time, staring at that reflection in the darkened window. My hand was still dusted with sugar from the cookies, but the box felt heavy, like it was made of lead. I didn't eat another one that night. I just sat in the silence of my own house and listened to the clock ticking in the hallway. It sounded like a countdown. I've always told people that life is like a book, but what I didn't realize back then was that I was letting the pages yellow and curl without even trying to turn them. I was waiting for the end to just happen to me. Then came November 14th. It was my granddaughter Clara's 3rd birthday. The house was full of that frantic, beautiful energy children have. The smell of vanilla frosting, the screech of wrapping paper, the sound of tiny feet drumming on the hardwood. Clara came over to me, clutching a handful of those bright wooden blocks, and she tugged on my cardigan. "Build a tower, Nana," she whispered. "Down here?" She pointed to the rug. A simple request, right? A grandmother sitting on the floor with her favorite girl. But as I looked down at that rug, I felt a wave of cold, sharp terror. I was 98 kilograms of stiff joints and dormant muscle. My center of gravity felt like an anchor dragging behind a ship. I tried. I really did. I gripped the arm of the heavy wingback chair and tried to lower myself, but my left knee gave a sickening, hot pop. I had to sort of collapse into a heap. I made it look like a joke, like I was falling on purpose to make her laugh. But once I was down there, the reality hit me. The carpet fibers felt rough and dusty against my palms. I smelled the old wool of the rug and the faint scent of Clara's baby shampoo, and I realized I couldn't get back up. I spent 10 minutes on that floor, 10 minutes pretending to be a sleeping giant while Clara piled blocks on my stomach, but inside I was screaming. I was looking at the underside of the coffee table, at the dust bunnies and the stray pennies, and I realized I was a prisoner. I was 77 years old, and I was trapped on a rug because my own body had become a cage I didn't have the key for. Eventually, my son-in-law had to help me up, laughing off my stiff legs, but I saw the look in his eyes. It was pity, that quiet, devastating pity. Later that evening, after the cake was gone and the house was quiet again, my daughter Sarah sent me a few photos from the party. I scrolled through them on my phone until I hit one, a candid shot Sarah had taken while I was asleep in the lawn chair after lunch. The light was harsh. It didn't hide anything. I saw a gray, slumped woman with 3 chins and eyes that looked like they were sinking into her face from all the inflammation. I looked exhausted, not just tired from the party, but tired of being. I looked like a ghost that hadn't realized it was dead yet. I looked at that photo, then I looked at the date on the top of the screen. November 14th. It was exactly 18 months ago. I didn't cry. I didn't have the energy for tears. I just felt this cold, hard knot form in my stomach. A realization that wasn't about getting skinny or looking young. It was about sovereignty. I realized I was choosing to leave this world years before my heart actually stopped beating. I was choosing to be a memory while I was still sitting in the room. That night, I didn't go for the cookies. I went to the hallway closet and pulled out a pair of old sneakers I hadn't laced up in 3 years. The next morning, at 6 a.m., the world was still blue and bruised looking. I went out then because I didn't want the neighbors to see me. I didn't want the polite pity of people watching an old woman struggle to move. The air was biting, that damp autumn chill that gets right into your bones, and the silence of the street felt like a judgment. I stood on my porch, gripping the railing. My heart was already thudding against my ribs just from the anxiety of it. I took one step, then another. I walked to the blue mailbox at the corner. It's not far, maybe 50 yards. But by the time I reached it, the sweat was stinging my eyes, and my lungs felt like they were being squeezed by a corset. I counted them. 120 steps. That was my limit. 120 steps to the mailbox. I leaned against that cold metal box, my breath coming in shallow, ragged whistles. And I looked back at my house. It looked so far away. But as I stood there, shivering in the pre-dawn light, I made a choice. It wasn't a grand vow. It was just a quiet, fragile no. No, I am not a ghost. No, I am not finished. I haven't done anything yet, really. I've just walked to a mailbox and back. But as I turned to head home, the weight of the decision felt heavier than the 98 kilos I was carrying. I was standing at the edge of a very long, dark woods, and for the first time in a decade, I wasn't going to turn back. It wasn't a montage. You know the ones I mean. In the movies, the music swells. The hero runs up some museum steps in a gray sweatshirt, and suddenly they're a different person. My life wasn't a movie. There was no music. There was just the sound of my own heavy, rhythmic breathing in the 6 a.m. cold and the persistent, dull ache in my hips that seemed to ask me every single morning, Olivia, what on earth do you think you're doing? I'll tell you exactly what I was doing. I was failing. At least that's what it felt like for the first 3 months. That next Monday, after the mailbox incident, I didn't just walk to the corner. I went past it. Another 20 steps, then another. I did it at 7:15 every morning, like a clock. I chose that time because the sun was up enough to see the cracks in the sidewalk, but the neighborhood was still mostly asleep. It was just me and the occasional stray cat. My lungs felt like they were made of rusted tin, and my feet, well, they felt like 98 kilos of lead. But I did it. 7 days a week. No excuses. Then came the kitchen. I'm a librarian. I like order. But my pantry was a chaotic collection of easy things. Boxes with labels I couldn't pronounce. Brightly colored packages that promised comfort, but only delivered that heavy, cloying fog in my brain. One rainy Saturday afternoon, I took 6 large black trash bags to the curbs. 6! I cleared out everything that wasn't real. If it didn't come from the earth or have a mother, it went in the bag. I replaced it all with things that required a knife. That's the sound of my new life. The thwack of a knife hitting a wooden cutting board, chopping spinach, prepping a piece of chicken, zesting a lemon. The house started to smell different, earthy, bright, sharp. I was 77 years old, learning how to cook for one all over again. It was slow, it was tedious, and honestly, it was boring. But for the first time in years, I wasn't eating to hide. I was eating to move. By the second month, I added the yellow snake. That's what I called the light resistance band I bought at the pharmacy. I hooked it over the brass handle of my bedroom door, twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, right after my walk. I'd stand there in my bathrobe, pulling that latex band toward my chest. I remember the smell of the latex, clinical and sharp. I remember looking at my triceps in the mirror and seeing them tremble, not a little shake, a violent visible vibration. 2 sets of 10 repetitions. That was it. It felt pathetic. I'd finish those 20 movements and feel like I'd tried to move a mountain. But the next morning, there was a new sensation. Not the bad pain of inflammation, but a dull, satisfying hum in the muscle. It was like they were finally waking up after a 20-year nap. But then came day 120. I remember it because it was a Tuesday and it was pouring rain. I'd been walking, I'd been thwacking my vegetables, I'd been pulling my yellow snake for 4 months. I stepped on that cold, unforgiving metal scale in my bathroom, expecting a reward. The needle didn't move, not a gram. I stood there in the gray morning light, my bare feet freezing on the scale, and I felt a wave of such profound, crushing defeat. I wanted to go downstairs, find a box of those butter cookies, and just crawl back into my heavy wool coat of a body. I thought, the scale is telling you the truth, Olivia. You're too old. The debt is too high. Just stop. I sat on the edge of the tub for a long time, listening to the rain drumming on the roof. I looked at my sneakers by the door. They were muddy, worn, and then I realized something. My scale was a liar, but my lungs weren't. I could walk to the park now, nearly a mile, without that whistling sound in my chest. I didn't need 3 rest stops to get to my bedroom anymore. The weight hadn't changed that month, but the way I occupied the weight had. I didn't miss a walk that day. I went out in the rain. It's the boring middle that breaks people, you know? The weeks that look exactly like the weeks before. The repetition, the lack of applause. But I kept showing up. I kept choosing the spinach over the sugar. I kept pulling that yellow band until the trembling stopped. Then, about a week after the scale plateau, something happened. I was in the kitchen and I dropped a lemon. It rolled under the heavy oak dining table, the one I usually avoided because getting under it was a death sentence for my knees. Without thinking, I reached down. I crouched. My heels stayed on the floor. My knees didn't pop. I grabbed the lemon and then I just stood back up. I didn't use the table for leverage. I didn't groan. I didn't have to plan the ascent like I was climbing Everest. I just stood up. I stayed there for a second, holding that lemon, staring at the empty chair across from me. My heart was thumping not from effort, but from a quiet electric shock of recognition. The door wasn't open yet, not all the way. But the latch had clicked. I could see a sliver of light on the floor, and for the first time, I knew I wasn't just waiting for the end. I was actually finally beginning. Funny, the things that stick with you. You'd think it would be a grand moment, wouldn't you? A ribbon cutting or a fanfare. But for me, it was the smell of old leather and the sharp metallic clink of a punch tool. I was in my hallway and my trousers, the ones I'd bought just 2 months prior, were sliding down my hips. I had to go into the back of the closet and find my father's old leather working kit. I sat there on the edge of the bed, the same bed where I used to lie awake with my knees throbbing, and I smelled that worn, familiar scent of the leather belt. I had to punch a new hole, then another. And as I slid that silver prong into a place it hadn't touched in 20 years, I looked down at my waist. It wasn't a soft middle anymore. It had a shape. I wasn't shrinking away from the world. I was finally coming into focus. People ask me what changed. They want a secret. They want me to tell them about a magic spark or a sudden burst of lightning. But there wasn't any lightning. There was just 18 months of Tuesdays, 18 months of walking when the pavement was wet, and 18 months of choosing the spinach over the sugar when I was tired and lonely. It's the quietness of it that surprises me most. I'm 30 kilograms lighter than I was that night. I couldn't zip up my navy dress. 30 kilograms. That's the weight of a medium-sized dog or a heavy suitcase you'd take on a long trip. I'd been carrying that suitcase every single day for a decade, and now it's just gone. My heart rate has dropped by 15 beats a minute. My doctor looks at my charts and just shakes his head like he's reading a book with a twist ending he didn't see coming. But the numbers aren't the story. They're just the proof. The real story happened on a Sunday hike about 3 weeks ago. We were out on the ridge, Sarah, my son-in-law, and the kids. It's a steep climb, all shale and stubborn roots. I remember reaching the top, the cool wind drying the sweat on the back of my neck, and I turned around to wait for the others. My heart was thrumming against my ribs, not that panicked, ragged whistle from before, but a steady, powerful rhythm, like a drum. I watched Sarah, my 45-year-old daughter, stop 10 yards below me to catch her breath. She looked up at me, squinting against the sun, and she just stared for a second. "Mom," she said, her voice a little shaky, "can you actually help me with my training? I can't keep up with you anymore." I didn't know what to say. I just stood there on that ridge, looking out over the valley, and I realized I am no longer the woman who needs to be looked after. I am the matriarch. I am the one setting the pace. I'm 77 years old, and I move through this world with a lightness I thought I'd surrendered forever. I caught my reflection in a shop window downtown yesterday. I actually walked past it, then doubled back because I didn't recognize the woman walking toward me. She moved with such ease. Her shoulders were back. Her eyes were bright. She didn't look like a ghost in a heavy coat. She looked like a warrior who had finally come home from a very long, very quiet war. I didn't get my youth back. That's a lie people tell to sell you things. I got something much better. I got the 77-year-old version of myself that was buried under all that resignation and sugar. I found the woman who was still in there, waiting for me to remember her. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm a librarian. I've spent my life surrounded by other people's stories, and I know that everyone's journey has its own rhythm. I don't have a map for you. I don't have a miracle to promise, but I wanted you to hear this because I know what it's like to stand at the bottom of the stairs and wonder if you'll ever make it to the top. I know what it's like to look in the mirror and see a stranger you've learned to apologize for. I see you. I was you. That is all I know.